Hi, welcome to the last video that I prepared on some exploration I've been doing of using AWS Workspaces to provide a consistent Linux environment for students to undertake some educational material. The key goals in using Workspaces and in general using VMs just to provide a consistent environment for students, the same operating system, the same software installed, the same compute resources available, for example 2 CPUs, 8 gigabytes of RAM. Avoiding all those problems as students using different operating systems, having different applications installed, being set up in different ways, etc. Also avoiding the problems of actually running, building, managing your own EC2 instances or VMs or whatever cloud provider you're using that then need to be set up to serve VNC or a remote desktop service remotely to students. A relatively expensive option without the ability to automatically stop or suspend the machines when the students aren't using them, certainly not out of the box anyway. So Workspaces. First video briefly went over the admin experience, what out of the box sort of point and click menu options are provided as part of the Workspaces offering. Things like resetting passwords, editing user details, for example, the email address. When we were playing around with this, I mistyped an email address for one of my teammates. Editing the email address to correct that and getting a new invite email sent out was trivial to do. The second video went more into the desktop experience that the students would have and offered an approach for bootstrapping that initial set of software that we need to install for them, a particular version of Python, the Virtual Studio Code, and other software in this specific case, and using a script to automate that process along with GitHub Actions to provide something along the lines of a continuous integration environment. Give you early warning when there are issues with your automation. This video is going to look at the Workspaces infrastructure. It's very, very simple and using CloudFormation to provision and manage that infrastructure. Creating Workspaces and how you can do that without using necessarily the console. Billing and how that works for Workspaces, how to find the billing information, and a quick cost comparison with EC2 instances. Okay, to begin, we'll look at setting up Workspaces infrastructure. So this infrastructure is available in the same GitHub repository that the last video used to install software for the installation script and the GitHub Actions. There is an infrastructure _example directory in there which has a workspaces.yml file, and that file describes the infrastructure that's needed to run a basic Workspaces setup. It's based on a template that AWS provides that I've linked there. We have a set of parameters, so you can customize the template to fit in an environment as needed or to be able to run a second stack of these components next to an existing stack. This template actually starts from nothing. It creates a new VPC, internet gateway, private and public subnets, NAT gateways, etc. It's a standard AWS VPC configuration, but the odds are in a real environment, so you already maybe have many of the components already deployed, and so you wouldn't necessarily need to run a second set of NAT gateways, for example, which are the most expensive component after the Workspaces themselves. You may already be running those gateways and able to reuse them. So a lot of the template is about setting up that basic infrastructure. When we get down to directory here, this is where we have the two components really that are relevant. We set up an AWS Simple AD service, providing an admin password for that and telling it which subnets and VPC to deploy into. There is guidance on the AWS website about how many users can be supported by different Simple AD sizes. Size small is going to be plenty for the kind of numbers of users that I'm interested in, tens to hundreds at a time. The other component is an IAM role that is used by Workspaces, and it's essentially a copy and paste of documentation from documentation. So that's essentially the guts of the template. If you've not used CloudFormation before, I'll give you a really quick look at the CloudFormation user interface. Everything I'm going to do here you can also do through the command line through automation tooling that you might want to use instead of clicking and pointing and clicking in the console. But so we've got test. So this is the stack that I've been working on. If I wanted to create my own copy of this stack, I can click Create Stack with new resources. Template is ready. Upload a template file, and I can pick the template file from that project. And here we are inside so here's the project. You can see infrastructure example and workspaces.yml. So we'll click on that. That is uploaded, and we can click next and start setting these parameters. Set that admin password, change the subnet CIDRs if that is necessary to work in whatever environment you want to deploy this into. So I'm not going to go any further than this. Essentially, I would click next, approve the changes, and then it would deploy the stack. So I'm going to cancel that. There are lots of documentation for CloudFormation if you do want to look more into the details of how that works. But that is not what this video is about. Okay. So what we are going to flick to now is just telling you about the Create Workspaces AWS CLI tool. You can essentially provision workspaces using a script, using the CLI tool. So essentially AWS workspaces create workspaces, minus workspaces, etc. A bunch of parameters you can provide. You can't actually create and register new users in SimpleAD, not via any mechanism that I've found so far anyway, through automation. If there is a way of doing that, it probably involves like directory management tools. But certainly for the case I've got involved, it's not a major hardship to go and, for a new cohort of students, go and just register the students' new accounts in the directory. Then creating the workspaces could still benefit from wrapping a script around this just to make sure that the workspaces are created consistently, that they are getting the same type of workspace. We're not going to have a misclick and give someone a standard workspace when they need a performance workspace. It also helps us make sure that, for example, the disks that are being used are encrypted, and that they are encrypted by default rather than needing someone to actually click on those buttons to make sure they're encrypted. Any tags we might want to apply, which could be really handy if we're running multiple cohorts concurrently or for billing purposes, we could also make sure they're applied as part of those scripts too. So could be some good reasons to use the automation to use automation to create the workspaces themselves, even though we can't register the users directly through automation, as far as I can tell. On the subject of billing, if you've not seen billing yet in AWS, essentially the way that I would get to it, you would go up to the top right corner where you'll see your currently logged in username. You'll see I see billing dashboard as an option in that menu. I click on that and it opens a billing dashboard. If you don't see the billing dashboard, or you get red kind of like unable to access whatever messages here, you may need to speak to your AWS administrators to get access to billing. But this is the kind of thing you might expect to see. What I would do is go to Cost Explorer here to understand workspaces billing specifically. Monthly spend by service view. And then I would click on usage type to give me some insight into the workspaces specifically. So you can see here that's my total cost. So I started playing around with workspaces around in February, and you can tell because that's when the NAT gateway started charging me. So I was running workspaces in February, March and April in 2022 into May 2022. The NAT gateway was costing me my first full month $71.42, $69.12, $71.42. It's a fairly fixed cost depending on how many days there are in the month. So as I say, if you're already running NAT gateways and they can support the traffic, then you can avoid having this additional cost. These EU, AW, HWL usage types are the workspaces themselves. You can kind of tell because they say auto stop on them. I'm not sure why there's different ones involved. Probably over I've been experimenting. I provision different kinds of workspaces, but you can see we've got some costs coming up in the months for these different workspaces, but the costs are not huge. I've probably been using the workspaces for at most kind of 20 hours a month, I would say, probably maybe a bit less than that, I'm not sure. But I've not been using them a huge amount. But it might be, I'd imagine it's not enormously different to how much a student might use a workspace in a month. The directory itself is a little bit lower down the report here. You can see that in February I was billed 31 cents for the directory, and I wasn't billed anything in the subsequent months. When a workspace is attached to the directory, you don't actually have to pay for the simple AD directory itself. It's covered in documentation. As long as a workspace is attached, you don't actually have to pay anything for that work, for the simple AD service. And that's about all I want to show you in billing. While we're here, billing alarms are good if you are going to play around with workspaces. Highly recommend setting a billing alarm if you don't have billing alarm set already. Give yourself an early warning if you do start to run up any costs that you weren't expecting. Again, outside the scope of this video to show you how to do that, but it's you can find plenty of examples and documentation on the net. So workspaces, so it would be useful to know how much, or to be able to project how much a set of workspaces is going to cost. And AWS provides a calculator for that. Obviously, I guess it must be a commonly asked question. So from the workspaces pricing, I can create a custom estimate. For in Ireland, let's say there's one workspace, it's a Linux workspace. There's no license involved because Linux workspace, I'm going for performance. Let's leave the volume sizes at the default. Flick this to hourly because we're looking at on-demand pricing. And a student, well, if a student uses the workspace for 40 hours in a month on a part-time course such as this, or on a course that will last for a week, that's some fairly hefty use, I would think. So 40 hours is probably like getting towards the kind of maximum I expect a student to use it. The nice thing about this approach is that if a student doesn't use it, if a student uses it for 20 hours or 10 hours, you only get billed for that. So 40 hours a month, we end up with $27.20 as the estimate. Now, just to see how that multiplies out, if there are 10 workspaces set up the same way, it's $272. So this calculator is just linearly, it just costs the same. Each new workspace costs the same again. So that's one workspace will cost us $27.20 a month if the student used it for the full 40 hours. If they only used it for 20 hours, it will cost us $17.60. Compare that to EC2 on-demand pricing. So if we pull an EC2 instance out in Ireland again, in Linux, Linux operating system, general purpose instances, 2 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, the cheapest instance type that we have is this T4G.large at $0.0736 an hour. So the question is, how much is that going to cost us at 24 hours a day times by, let's say, 30 days in the month? $53 it will cost to run an EC2 instance to provide the same service at the same amount of resources, the same amount of compute resources as the workspace. But it will cost $52.99 a month, whether it's used or not. And as I said, that's about double what the $27 that was the 40 hours a month estimate for a workspace. And say 40 hours a month is probably towards the higher end of usage. I would probably expect a lower number of hours used over any given month. So that could represent a big cost saving for your overall your overall costs of running a cohort through a course. And that's what I wanted to cover today.